Hello, welcome to Winter Activities, Risks and Layering with the Portland State University Outdoor Program. My name is Ian. I'm a trip leader at the outdoor program, and I'm going to be presenting this material to you today. So it should be, about a 30 to 35-minute video on YouTube maybe. I might look like a fool if that's way off. But we're going to be talking about a number of things related to, the risks of winter activities as well as layering to help prevent some of those risks. So my next slide has kind of a set of topics that we're talking about today. First of all, driving, getting to the location, layers, navigation, some environmental hazards, kind of the juicy part of the presentation, talking about avalanches and the like, and self-arrest, which we'll talk about very briefly. This is not a training on self-arrest, I'll say that right now, in case that's what you're watching the whole video for. You won't be certified and you won't know how to do it. So if you want to learn how to do a self-arrest, you will have to take an actual course in person, certainly. There will be in-person training for that. But that's a nice skill, and it is definitely related to preventing trying to minimize the risks of winter adventures. So I would recommend that if you're spending a lot of time outdoors in the winter. All right, without further ado, getting right into winter driving. This slide basically has a bunch of different tips. And the next slide will be different gear to bring, but these are, tips from states that really have a lot of snowy winters, so we know we can trust them. Essentially, they recommend knowing beforehand the road conditions and the weather conditions, and planning ahead, preparing, keeping your car stocked with what they say an ice scraper and a shovel, as well as blankets and stuff to keep warm. The shovel is definitely a big one. We'll talk about that in a second. And keeping your tires pumped. So some good protocol. I think the most important things though are the things to bring, to have in your car. This slide does a good job, fairly good job. Water and snacks, food, warm clothes, an ice scraper is very important, a flashlight, a first aid kit, a phone charger, and then really big things is having a full tank of gas, chains, and jumper cables, really, because car batteries really struggle out there in the cold. Flares, okay, whatever. One thing that you really should have in your car that's not mentioned on this list is a shovel. If you're going up onto, say, Mount Hood or somewhere where there's a lot of snow, a shovel is super important. I've seen too many people get stuck on, a snowbank or something like that, just get their car stuck in snow. I've been in some sketchy situations myself. A little bit of personal experience. I remember on one outdoor program trip, someone, not an outdoor program person, but we were there, with a bunch of attendees, and someone just drove onto a snowbank and they didn't have a shovel, they didn't have any way to dig themselves off. So, 5 of us had to get out with our 5 shovels and spend 5 minutes digging them out. But, it's really highly recommend that you bring your own shovel. Anyway, another small personal experience. This winter driving stuff can be pretty serious. I had one experience one time where we got caught in the middle of a snowstorm, me and my partner coming back from a snowshoeing trip. And we were on a small highway, just one lane on each side. So it's supposed to be about 40 minutes of driving to get off this highway and onto the main road, 84, that we were trying to get to. Unfortunately, it took us about 6 hours of driving on that highway. Trees were falling, it was icy conditions. There were crews out there trying to cut the trees down, cut the trees out of the way rather. And I counted about 20 flipped cars there, and a lot of, slid off the road, not just flipped. And a lot of that is not having chains. Some cars I'm sure were pulled off, ran out of gas, going slowly. So, this stuff's pretty serious and it really does happen to people. So being prepared for this, I want to highlight that at this presentation. The driving is a pretty major aspect of any kind of risk. On outdoor program trips, we generally say that the most risky part of the trip is the driving, and that's pretty darn true. So I would recommend taking that aspect pretty seriously. But with that, we'll move along to chains. We're not moving away from driving entirely. There are multiple different kinds of chains. Really briefly, the one with the cross that you see right there, that's a Euro sock. A lot of 4-wheel drive, like Subarus, will require that you have one of these. A little bit expensive, but that's what's required for that. The yellow ones is kind of I think SUV design for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why, never used them. And the ones on the left and right are more standard chains. If you have the choice, skip the ones on the right. Yeah. Okay, so some of the next part of the presentation is layers. That's a big part of the presentation. That's what I'm trying to say. So a good layering system will, make your winter adventure much nicer. It will keep you warm, dry, and comfortable, even in undesirable conditions. So being unprepared with your layers can lead to a pretty difficult situation in which you're uncomfortable, not enjoying your trip as much, and maybe you even make some, questionable safety decisions whilst uncomfortable, because that is totally how it is. At the outdoor program, we use, I believe it's called not an anagram, that would be different, but we say WISE, and each letter of that word stands for something. Those being wicking, insulating, shell, and extras. So the idea there is that you've got a wicking layer that's wicking moisture from your skin. You have an insulating layer that's keeping warmth within, that being a fleece or a puffy, something like that. And you have a shell that keeps moisture and condensation from the environment out. And extras is a couple things we'll chat about later, such as sunglasses and peripherals. So just going to dive into what that looks like for the different layers. So for the upper body, your wicking layer is a base layer. That's going to be a synthetic fabric or a wool, not cotton. The idea with cotton is that it holds that moisture energy. You don't have to wick it away. So synthetic or wool, an insulating layer, that would be fleece or puffy, something that's going to keep the warmth in. It doesn't have to be super warm, really, especially if you're doing really warm things out there like cross-country skiing or snowshoeing. You might want kind of a thin insulating layer. And your outer layer is a waterproof. Insulated or non-insulated is okay. Just something to keep the real condensation if it rains or snows out. And it looks similar for the pants. You want a base layer, that would be athletic leggings or long underwear, or base layer pants, they're sometimes marketed as. Again, non-cotton. Wicking layer, insulating layer, WISE. Fleece pants are awesome. If you've never seen those or know that they exist, I recommend them. But khakis are a normal pant that is preferably non-cotton, because cotton would stay wet for a long time, so not jeans, probably. Outer layer, rain pants. Get some rain pants. Recommend them. Recommend you have them if you go out. But as for the insulating layer, and the outer layer can be replaced by a pair of ski pants or something like that. Insulated waterproof layer. And on your feet, your socks, I recommend having them not be cotton. Wool is good. Synthetic is great. Boots, ideally waterproof would be good. It says we rent them at the outdoor program. Waterproof boots are great. Depending on how long you're out there, the caliber of boot that you require may differ. Your mileage may vary. And Gators are a really nice part. This is like your the shell layer on the WISE thing. There are a couple different kinds of Gators. We'll chat about them in a moment. But these will keep moisture out of from getting into your shoes, your socks, especially if you have waterproof shoes. Can add a lot to your system. All right, and those extras, WISE at the end. A hat, thinking thick synthetic or wool, something. Just a beanie. A face buff. Sunglasses are really good to have in any kind of situation where you're dealing with snow. Sometimes not necessary, but I really recommend that you bring them. Snow blindness is real. That's where too much sunlight, too much light is getting into your eyes, and it can cause people to essentially have trouble seeing and be in a lot of pain and headaches. So having sunglasses can literally prevent that. And goggles is great for extreme conditions, really cold or really snowy, blizzard kind of thing. Precipitation. One thing about that shell in the WISE system is the precipitation comes from within and without. There's a statistic somewhere on here. A human can sweat as much as 4 liters per hour or 14 liters per day, which is a crazy amount, obviously. And so having that shell out there, while it will keep moisture out, it will also keep it in. And so making sure to fight that condensation coming from the inside by keeping the shell open and having decent ventilation. If you have, armpit vents, having some pockets open, something like that can really help, especially if you're, if there's no condensation coming from the outside or minimal. Like snow, for example, light snow. It might not be worth, if you're sweating, really having that totally sealed up. making sure that you're start slightly cold so that you're not sweating too much, and be more than willing to stop and delayer if you start feeling yourself start to sweat, because that's kind of the enemy. Sweat is the enemy, even if you have a good wicking layer. Fighting precipitation from the outside, high quality waterproof is a big thing. They can be kind of expensive. You can rent them from the outdoor program or some other place, like Next Adventure probably rents them, I assume. But it can make a big difference to have a quality one, really, because low quality waterproof just sometimes doesn't work. All right. Yeah, there we go. Also, this last one means having a good insulating layer, that is warm will keep the shell on the outside cold, which snow and stuff won't melt onto it, is the idea there. Dangerous temperatures. This is just a quick little thing I definitely want to mention. I have a little thermostat here to help me describe what I'm talking about, but essentially what I'm getting at is that there are a certain range of temperatures above freezing that can be a little bit more dangerous to watch out for when you're looking at that forecast to kind of understand that. So basically, if you're, dealing with temperatures like 28, 27 or below, you're generally going to be in the range where you're having snow and the air is dry. The advantage to that is if you have decent insulating layers and, some kind of shell, then you're essentially going to be able to stay warm as long as you've got, socks, boots, you've got the right gear. You're in a fairly safe spot in those temperatures because your body's going to be able to keep its heat. There's no moisture really sapping that heat away. And so there's actually kind of a safer range right below, freezing. It's a little bit worse, when you get to really low temperatures, that can be a bit dangerous. But the idea is that if you're right above freezing, at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, at 33, 35, then if rain comes, first of all, it could, penetrate your layers and be very cold, but also that could be freezing rain, it could potentially freeze on contact if you're just below freezing, but it's still raining. So that's a temperature range to watch out for sure, to prepare for. Just because it's just above freezing doesn't mean that that's actually better. That could put you in a more difficult spot. So being prepared for that, definitely. And once you're up to a warmer temperature, the risk of hypothermia lowers. All right, the next thing I want to talk about, now that we're done with layers, is navigation. Navigation is a really big thing in any kind of outdoor adventure, but it becomes even more critically important when you're out in the snow. That being the case because oftentimes you can end up with low visibility situations out there in the winter, whether that be, fog or actual, blizzard-like conditions or heavy snowfall, kind of relying on your senses or even just your ability to use a map and a compass all the time could be, map and compass are great, but you want to have extra navigational abilities and you want to have, extra knowledge of the terrain because situations can turn difficult to navigate really quickly when you can't see and you become, very easily disoriented. You have to be really careful about, stepping away from your backpack, stepping away from your layers, your tent, your shelter, and your food to, go use the restroom or something like that. And you want to make sure that you always have that navigational gear with you. And keeping all your stuff with you really when you're on a winter adventure because it can be really easy to get turned around with even light snowfall. So there are a couple pointers here that we'll just read through really quickly. Having a group, winter adventures with a group, really recommend having at least one person with you most of the time that you're doing a winter adventure. That is because of a number of environmental hazards that we'll get to later. But it really just becomes worth it to try to make sure that you're going out with people during winter adventures if you can. Low visibility tools, a GPS device or a phone that has GPS capabilities on it and a map loaded can really help when you're in low visibility because you can see your phone but you can't necessarily see what's going on around you. So navigating away from hazardous areas, making sure you're staying on trail, that can be really important, or on some semblance of a trail really. Inform someone of your travel plans in great detail when you're going out here just because there is a greater risk of you being lost and search and rescue having to come and look for you. And if they, know what your plan is, then they can figure out where you may be. So notify someone. And having a specific plan and not being afraid to turn back if stuff starts to look, go south, as they would say. If stuff starts to look not as good, being not afraid to turn back, certainly. Because like I said, the conditions can change very rapidly, and that's kind of the theme of this. Having a map, compass, and GPS device of some kind, phone or something like that, and extra knowledge of a plan and the applicable hazards, which we'll be chatting about in a little bit, are really all important for this kind of adventure. Some navigational hazards that we were chatting about on the last slide. These could include trail signs being hidden by snow. That can be quite hazardous, especially if you're not in a place where a lot of cross-country skiers go or snowshoers. Sometimes in that case, they'll have them above the snow on trees, but in some locale, your signs may be hidden, which could seriously hinder your ability to navigate. Low visibility and low contrast. The ground is white, the sky is white, everything is snow. Deep snow uses a lot more of your energy. Distance can be a lot harder to cover. Daylight hours are greatly reduced during winter. You have to watch out for that. And river and stream crossings can be hidden such that you don't know that you're crossing a river or stream. Stream really. And that could put you in a very difficult situation. Avalanche conditions, yeah. We'll talk about that more later. And there's a resource here. So tree wells are one of the environmental hazards. I thought that we were going to introduce that, but we will be chatting about environmental hazards, and one of them are tree wells. Tree wells are something that I think about something like 1 in 4. It's either winter adventure injuries and deaths or ski deaths. It come from tree wells. So this is a pretty serious environmental hazard. That's why we're talking about it first. If you don't know, a tree well is something that's formed when, a tree that's been sitting there since the snow melt prevents snow from packing in tightly at its base as the snow falls throughout the year. And so you end up with kind of a cylinder or a cone of either low density snow underneath the tree or hollow with no snow at all. And you may not be able to see that from where you are. As you can see in this picture, that it would be hidden by the branches. But this is a super dangerous situation. If you can envision from this picture, this skier losing control and heading into this tree and falling into this tree well, it can be a tight space. This one looks really big and spacious, and it looks like they might just be able to relax there and make a little fort. But in reality, what happens in these situations is it's generally you're unable to move once you fall into a tree well. Something about the physics of it makes it that once you fall into a tree well, it's very unlikely that you will be able to move yourself. You will very likely be stuck in that situation, unable to escape yourself. And this is one of the reasons that it's really important to be with someone out there, tree wells. And avalanches too, anything that causes you to be, stuck in snow in some sense. Something about the physics of the situation makes it very difficult to escape from that situation. So things that you can do to avoid getting into that situation where, you're breathing a limited amount of oxygen and totally stuck, especially if you go head first, is to avoid the base of trees or branches, knowing that there's probably a tree well under every little tree, or, every reasonably sized tree at least, going reasonably slowly within your comfort level, avoiding going into the backcountry like this, or off trail, off piste, without expertise. You have to be extremely competent to do that kind of stuff. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're going into a tree well, try to grab onto the branches of the tree near the base or the trunk of the tree itself. That's, your best shot, really. But tree wells are pretty scary, dangerous stuff. So just know that they're there and be wary of them. Tips for getting out. If you find yourself in a situation where you're not, totally stuck. First of all, travel with a friend. Where if you know what avalanche beacons, probe, and shovel are, we'll talk about them a little bit more later as some of the gear, but wearing them if you're with friends can be, or with a group, can be a really good thing to do in the snow, almost regardless of the conditions. It can be a really good choice to bring those. Do whatever you can to not go head first. That's how you really will get stuck and be, having trouble breathing, limited oxygen, stuff like that. So really try to go feet first wherever possible. Put arms above in front of face, creating the air pocket. That works. Stay calm, try not to panic, you will use more oxygen. That's scary to say. Avoid sudden movements, which could, compromise your position or put you in a situation where it's more difficult to move. And deliberately rock back and forth. Try to create additional space. Instead of wedging yourself into a more difficult situation, try to intentionally create extra space. Poke hole into snow with poles. I think the idea here is to open up with poles, to open up additional air pockets, additional pockets of oxygen that are trapped in the snow. I believe that may be the idea behind this. I'm not entirely sure, as I didn't do this research myself. Thank you to Carl from the outdoor program, but I believe that's the idea. If help is coming, bring a whistle. Yeah, having a whistle with you is pretty much essential on all kinds of outdoor adventures for this reason. If you happen to be alone, bringing a fully charged phone with you, keeping it in your chest pocket is apparently what's recommended by experts in the field. The chest pocket being the easiest to reach, presumably, in this situation. Having a voice activation setting, if you can, very interesting. Using the branches to pull your way out, and taking off your skis and stuff if you can, because they're really just going to impede your movement completely in there. You're not really going to be able to move your feet if you have skis on. Bunch of really good tips, straight from the experts. So, moving on to a different environmental hazard: snow bridges. You may not always notice that you're crossing a snow bridge. Sometimes they can be kind of hard to see. If you hear snow or water trickling underneath you, you may be on a snow bridge. You are on a snow bridge. It's right underneath you. I've been in a situation before where we were just walking on, something that looks like this snow here that you see, without the giant hole in it, and my hiking partner split just went right through the snow. That was pretty scary, and so they're definitely something to watch out for. These can happen from rivers, crevasses, or any kind of opening in the terrain. There's a couple photos of them here. A lot of them are caused from, water eroding the snow underneath. Avoid crossing them whenever possible. Seriously, I mean, there's only so much you can do to calculate the strength or thickness of them. At some point, every time you take one of these crossings, you're taking on a certain level of risk, especially the one on the bottom right there. That is terrifying. You want to avoid these in any situation that you can. If you have to cross one, check for stability and go one at a time. Yeah, big time. So these are pretty serious things as well. Snow cornices, another kind of snow that will collapse underneath you. This on the left is kind of a demonstration of how they're formed with the wind and what they look like. And on the right, there are a couple pictures of them. I'm not an expert on them, but you can see kind of the anatomy of one here, and you can understand how walking up anywhere on that could potentially cause it to fracture and put you, in a very serious situation there. In this picture on the right or the left, I mean, seriously looking at being in a lot of danger if you were to be on that cornice when it broke. So just be aware that those are, a serious threat and people are injured from these. If you were in this situation on this top right picture, or more likely the bottom right picture, seems like more of an area that people with less experience in general would be, if you're not like an expert mountaineer or something, which is awesome, by the way, if you are, in a serious amount of danger if you end up falling off these. So if you see a situation like this, make sure to realize that that's a threat and stay back away from that. In this bottom right one, you can see someone, skied out there and it started cracking and then they managed to get off of it. So very risky situation. It's captured on camera here, certainly. Everyone knows about avalanches. So there are a couple slides about these because there is a lot to know and they're super terrifying for sure, 100%. We're going to talk about conditions, equipment, and resources. So conditions, the primary condition factor for an avalanche really is the angle. So on the right here, this is a good anatomy. There's one on the left as well, but anywhere between 25 to 60 degrees avalanches are possible. But really 30 to 45 degrees is that risk angle that you want to watch out for. So on the left, you can see a person using a certain tool, which I believe we mentioned in a later slide, but I don't remember the exact name of the tool. But essentially it's a tool used to measure the slope so that you can determine whether you're in that high risk zone. There's another tool I wanted to mention briefly, which I'll just pan to right now. So there are various different websites that have a feature like this. This is CalTopo, which is a great mapping software that I rely on quite heavily personally. And we use frequently at the outdoor program to run our trips and to plan for them. So essentially what we've got here is you can see on the right-hand side, I've selected slope angle shading. And so it is shading according to this color coding key here. It is shading different slopes to tell us what angle they are. So let's say we were going on a trip at the White River up on Mount Hood. You may know of this area. Here's the parking lot, or this is one parking lot, here's another one. And this is where the trail goes. You can go all the way up here. You can snowshoe all the way up here. Eventually you'll run into the Pacific Crest Trail. I believe that's somewhere up here. There you go. Or that's the Timberline Trail, excuse me. But say you were to camp out here. You were to just camp right on here. You would be able to examine the avalanche risk here potentially. So this whole area is kind of in the, that 30 to 45 degree range, which is why it's being highlighted. And so, camping right here at the bottom would be maybe not the best idea, especially if it, seems to be avalanche conditions. So, or, walking up on it, maybe walk somewhere where avalanche conditions are slightly lesser, up here. That could be potentially a less avalanche prone area. I'm not an expert on these things, but essentially this is a tool that you can use in order to determine the most avalanche prone areas. And if you start looking up on Mount Hood, I mean, anyone who's summiting, then you're dealing with the real risks, I mean, some of this is a little bit, this is very avalanche prone territory. So making sure that you're probably with a guide if you're not doing this, if you're not an expert. Other things to look out for, or tools which you can use. I'm not sure if they're addressed here. Yeah, so a slope that's too steep for avalanches, if you're actually out there and you're trying to determine if a slope is avalanche prone, if you see, beads of snow rolling down the hill, have rolled down the hill, there's lots of snow has been falling frequently down the hill basically, then you can tell that that's probably not super avalanche prone because it's that steep enough angle that it's not building up huge slabs of snow that are ready to just avalanche down. Because essentially what causes an avalanche is like basically slabs of snow that are on this angle that haven't fallen until something triggers them. And so they build up and compress on top. And then you can end up with snow of lower compaction below, that's called a slab avalanche, which is what most avalanches that we see are slab avalanches. You have a big slab of compressed snow, maybe a little bit icy, different conditions, and then it gets released. There's lighter snow underneath it, just allows it to slide. That's when you get into a really tough spot. So safety equipment, those being a shovel, a beacon, a probe, and potentially an airbag. That's one thing. But the beacon and probe are really the key. The beacon, probe, and shovel are kind of the key tools here. The idea is that everyone, I can briefly explain how the beacon works. It really comes down to the beacon, but it is a whole system. Everyone on your team that's out there in the snow in avalanche conditions will have a beacon on them. The way that these beacons work is that they are constantly transmitting a signal. And so if one person or two people, get caught in an avalanche and they get, say, buried under a couple feet of snow somewhere with enough oxygen to last 10 minutes, suddenly you're in a rescue situation. And what the other people can do with their beacons is switch them into search mode. And what search mode does for the beacons is that since all these beacons are on the same frequency, it allows those beacons to, you can see what I'm saying. They search for them. Different beacons have different methods for this, but generally, it beeps more frequently as you get closer to it, as I understand it. I'm not an expert. And it generally gives you some sort of visual metric to be able to determine their direction. And so you can essentially map out where this person is under the snow, by, say you find an approximate location, then you can move to this direction and it beeps less frequently. You know that they're this way. You move this way and you kind of find where they are on this axis. And then on the other axis, beeping less frequently. And so you can triangulate their location. And that's when the Avalanche Probe comes in. The Avalanche Probe is basically a long, sharp stick that you can extend. It's collapsible. So you'll extend it, and once you find as accurate of a location as you can with the beacon, you're stabbing through the snow to try to find the depth at which they are. So you're trying to stab, to the person, to poke them so that you can feel where they are. That's where the probe comes in, and then it's digging with the shovel. So that's why all of these pieces of equipment are requirements. Now, an airbag, I'm really not an expert on, but I believe that would be a bag that would help you to float potentially in an avalanche condition, but probably do some internet research on your own because I don't know the most about these. But obviously they're considered a component of avalanche equipment. Some resources. Northwest Avalanche Center has a course, safety courses, so you can become their, this is kind of right here, recreational avalanche training and professional avalanche training. They have courses that you can do to learn about avalanches, which will be really important if you're doing some kind of search and rescue sort of thing, but also especially these ones on the left is just any recreational skier or someone like that who's doing backcountry stuff. Highly recommend that you get these trainings because that information can definitely save your life. Avalanche forecast also available on the NVAC, Northwest Avalanche Center. And here's that Caltopo grade of slope feature that we were talking about earlier. All right, one of the last things we're talking about today, if not the last, is self-arrest. Like I said, we're not going into how to necessarily here, but essentially self-arrest is a really important skill. It's one of the most important things that you can know how to do with the ice axe. Of course, there are other tools, there are other uses for the ice axe, but a self-arrest is a mountaineering technique that allows you to arrest a slide down a slope. So say you were sliding down an icy slope or a snowy slope, sliding out of control, on a mountainous area, going into a self-arrest, which is being demonstrated in this bottom right picture, is an effective way to stop yourself from sliding. And so it's using that the pick across your body like this. It's really hard to demonstrate it, but you can look up a video on YouTube of people doing self-arrest. Essentially, it's a skill that you need to practice in person, and so it's just a skill that you need to learn in person. Yeah, I know that I think REI, I'm sure, has classes like that, but you can get training on this with a small amount of internet research, or if you have an outdoor program facility sort of thing that runs trips, they're very likely to offer you some sort of training on this. So definitely an important skill if you're doing mountaineering specifically. If you're going to be up on those big, steep slopes, it's really important to have this skill. So it's just something we kind of have to mention. If we're really talking about winter safety, this is a big component of it in that kind of winter adventure. But I mean, totally irrelevant if you're doing cross-country skiing or snowshoeing, and it's just a skill that you have to learn on your own. So that's where I'm going to leave that. Recap. Yeah. Driving. Pay attention to the forecast. Be prepared. Assume the worst, really, I guess. Have a shovel with you. Layers. Wise. Wicking, insulating, shell, and extras. Bring those sunglasses. Don't forget the sunglasses. Don't forget the lip balm, the gloves, the hat, that stuff. Navigation. Having extra navigation with you. Extra preparedness when you're going on a winter adventure because stuff can go south that much more quickly. You can be in the dark that much more quickly. You can be stuck in snow with broken gear that much more quickly. And definitely informing someone. Environmental hazards. Being aware of them. There are just more of them in the snow, really. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. There are just more environmental hazards in the snow than, on a summer backpacking trip. Tree walls are a big one. Snow bridges are big. Cornices, if you're up on, on peaks, really. Most adventures you won't see snow cornices, but being aware that they exist. And avalanches are basically always a threat. Smaller or larger avalanches, just being on the lookout for that 30 to 45 degree slope, really, and keeping yourself safe in that situation. Self-arrest, learn it if you're interested in mountaineering. I mean, that if you're interested in mountaineering. So thank you for coming to this presentation. Ian, was more than happy to present it. For more information, Or to rent gear, stop by the Portland State University outdoor program based at the Rec Center, Portland State University. There are a couple photos here of our gear. As you can see, we rent, backpacks, cross-country skis, tents, sleeping bags, all kinds of camping gear. Snowshoes are one of our more popular items. We have winter boots, mountaineering boots, ski boots, boats, kayaks, rafts, inflatable stand-up paddle boards. We have a lot of gear, and if you're a Portland State University student, it's very reasonably cheap, and if you're a member of the community, it's also reasonably priced. Really, it's just slightly more expensive than the students pay. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Come and swing by the outdoor program. Want to chat? Want to rent some gear? Look forward to seeing you. I'll stop the recording now.